Hey, Meryl, Amanda, that's a cool background.
We need to get you one. We need to get everybody one.
Yeah, can you link that over?
Who shared that? Was that Jackie? Jackie, did you share that?
Yes, yes. So I could email it to everyone in this group. I can't remember if there's a link posted on the website, but I could definitely email the file.
That'd be awesome.
That would be, yeah, I think that would be a lot of fun. Thank you.
I think we'll wait a few minutes and get some more people in, and then we can get started.
Okay.
All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, this is my first time juggling a PowerPoint, a Zoom, and notes. So I'm hoping the appropriate thing shows on the screen. So hello, everybody. Thank you all for sharing your Saturday with me and the rest of the SIG members. So my name is Janae, and I am the advocacy chair for the APTA Washington Student Special Interest Group. So this is the first national advocacy dinner to be held in Washington. So I'm very grateful that we have such a turnout. I graduated from Duke University this past month, and I'm currently residing in Seattle, Washington. Okay, so you all should have received the program yesterday. It just has the agenda and it has all of the panelists and facilitator information on there. So just to reiterate, we're just going to have some opening remarks, and then we'll have the panel discussion following for the next hour. And then for the latter hour, we'll be going through breakout rooms. And with each of these breakout rooms, they'll be broken into subtopics with some of the panelists and some extra guests who are serving as facilitators for these breakout rooms. So I want to do a quick introduction for our student special interest group team. So the SIG acts as a bridge between APTA Washington and the students. So actually every DPT and PTA student in Washington is automatically a SIG member. It's completely free to join. We host social events such as our Quiz Bowl last month, and we help organize events such as Legislative Impact Day, this event, and the Student Conclave. I know that most of us, if not all of us, are having Zoom fatigue from this past year, and we're hoping this will be our last virtual event or one of the last virtual events for a while. So keep a lookout for more emails from us regarding Student Conclave, which is going to be a free conference for students that will be held in October. So if you see one of these members in the breakout rooms, don't hesitate to reach out or DM us. So first we have Jamie from University of Washington. She's here today. And then we have Joanna from the University of Puget Sound, who's our vice president. We have Chloe from Pima, who is our secretary and communications chair. And then we have our treasurer, Peter, from the University of Washington. There's myself as an advocacy chair. We have Amy from the University of Washington, who is our student conclave chair. And Kenny from the University of Puget Sound, who is our diversity, equity, and inclusion chair that was just created this last year. Next, we have Ariana, who's from Spokane Falls Community College, who is our PTA student liaison. And then we have Gus from Eastern, who is our PT liaison. So moving on to the panelists, I'm going to give a very brief introduction. They are all so decorated. I can't obviously fit everything into one slide, and they'll have time, as well as the facilitators, to introduce themselves later in the evening. So first we have Ben Boyle, who is our APTA Washington president-elect. So he's going to be a president this upcoming year. And he's also our legislative chair. And when he's not doing advocacy work, he's working as a chief clinical affairs officer at IRG PT. Next, we have Melissa Johnson, who is our lobbyist for the APTA, and she's a partner of Bogart and Johnson, which is a law firm that advocates for organizations during the legislative sessions, and includes the Washington Speech Language Hearing Association and the Washington State Nurses Association. So next we have Jonathan Hook, who is our current APTA Washington Federal Affairs Liaison. He's a faculty member at the Developing Whitworth University DPT program, and he is a clinician at Physical Therapy Associates in Spokane. Next, we have Katie Scaff, who is also from Duke. She graduated in 2019, and she completed her orthopedic residency last year at the University of Utah and VA. She's one of the current Washington delegates to the House of Delegates, and she is a Centennial Scholar by the Catherine Worthingham Fellows of the APTA. Next, we have Amanda. She is our APTA Washington Physical Therapy Assistant Caucus Representative Alternate, and she's also the PTA Director to the Board of Directors. And last of our panelists, we have Robert Cheng. He's the owner of Performance Rehab, and he's a member of the APTA Washington Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee that was also instated last year. He's worked everywhere, including New York, Swedish, and was part of the Sports Medicine Center at Husky Stadium. So next, I want to give a brief shout out to our breakout room facilitators. They're all such decorated clinicians and longtime advocates of the APTA Washington, who will be helping lead out the breakout sessions as well as the rest of the panelists. So we have Robin. She's the former APTA Washington Vice President from 2014 to 2018, and is a current member of the Legislative Committee. We have Eric, who is the bike extraordinaire. He's the owner of Bike PT and Corpor Sano Physical Therapy in Kenmore, and he is the former APTA Washington president. He's also seen patients from 6 to 3 today, so kudos to him for putting us in his schedule. And last, we have Ali Schus. She has served numerous APTA roles. She's a co-founder of Peak Sports and Spine Physical Therapy, and currently she serves as the APTA Private Practice Section Board of Directors and Telehealth Task Force. So the moderator of our discussion today is Dr. Meryl Gersh. She is the current APTA Washington president and professor Moreta at Eastern Washington University's DPT program. She's been a long time advocate for her profession, and she has received recognition for her professional and academic service, including the Award for Excellence from the Academy of Clinical Electrophysiology and Wound Management, Leadership in Education Award from the APTA Academy of Education, the Lucy Blair Service Award from the APTA, and the Trustees Medal from Eastern Washington University. Okay, Meryl, I am giving the floor to you. Let's see.
Okay. Let's see. Everyone can hear me? Terrific. I want to, first of all, thank the student SIG of APTA Washington for really doing a very heavy lift and a very rapid lift and putting together this, our first virtual advocacy, quote unquote, dinner. In the future, I hope that we'll actually be able to have actual face-to-face advocacy event and maybe even a face-to-face dinner. So I look forward to that. A special shout out to Janae, who has been juggling a whole host of things in the past month, including taking her boards, traveling back east to graduate from Duke, traveling back here to, to host this event, and also to the entire board of the SIG. Thanks so very much. I appreciate Janae introducing all of the panelists, and I would say that what I'd like to do is get started with the little introduction on today's event, and then if folks want to add anything to their introductions, they can do so at the beginning of responding to questions. So we're going to talk today about advocacy, and I'm going to try and give you a little bit of a frame of reference, a little bit of a link between APTA, your APTA membership, and what that means to advocacy. The APTA is 100,000 members strong. 30% of those members are student members. 30,000 of you nationally are student members, 25,000 DPT students and 5,000 PTA students. You have a tremendous voice and a tremendous responsibility in terms of current and future advocacy. And I hope that what comes out of today is inspiring your interest and giving you some tools and some just very direct assistance in terms of facilitating your advocacy and getting you and keeping you excited about it. When most people talk to you about APTA membership, they talk about, quote unquote, the benefits of membership, the what you get, okay? And typically, these are the kinds of things you get. You get to join, you get a journal, you get the opportunity to network with other members. You get access to education, to a variety of continuing education events. You get discounted rates for meetings at the state level and at the national level. You have access to research presentations and to a variety of research grants. And you get a variety of other discounts. I joined APTA as a student in 1972. And when I joined, the APTA was the only place that I could access all of these benefits. Today, you can access these kinds of benefits in a whole host of different areas, lots of different organizations, through the internet, through colleagues, through members of other associations. You do not have to rely on APTA for the get, for what you get. And so how do we make your membership relevant to you? And I think that the key to the relevance of APTA membership is advocacy. This is not the get, this is the give. This is what you bring individually, each one of you, to the APTA, and what we bring together collectively, 100,000 members strong, to be able to express opinions and direct practice and direct legislative decision and direct funding in order to make sure that we have opportunities to advocate not only for our practice and our practice advances as our profession advances, but most importantly, that we are able to advocate for patient access and patient service at the peak of what we can offer. And that is the huge, for me, the huge overarching importance of membership. That is the relevance of membership. And to me, relevance is activism. Today, as we talk and answer some of your questions and have an opportunity for dialogue in smaller groups, we're going to look at advocacy opportunities on the national and state levels. We have members of the panel and facilitators who have a tremendous wealth of backgrounds in both national and state advocacy. We are very grateful, of course, to our lobbyist, Melissa, who's with us today, who has a tremendous and lengthy and devoted track record with us in terms of being our advocate to the state legislature. We have Jonathan Hook, who is a relatively new federal affairs liaison for us, and someone who is very, very excited about making sure that we know where our opportunities are to lobby at the national level and what we can do. We'll talk a little, we'll have the opportunity to respond to some questions about what the hot topics have been this past year, what the hot topics are in this coming year, and that way you will be best able to choose where you can offer your most enthusiasm and your greatest contributions in terms of topics of practice and patients that are of interest to you. You can get excited about, you can get behind, and you can be one of the 100,000 strong that APTA is in our advocacy efforts. So with that kind of frame of reference, the overarching APTA as our advocacy machine, if you will, and each one of you as a spoke in that wheel, and the recognition, because this is a student virtual advocacy event, that you are 30%. That is a tremendous influence, that has a tremendous energy. I mean, you are not an unimportant piece. You are a huge piece of APTA's advocacy strength. And so what I'd like to do now is I'd like to go to the questions. Let me let you know that if you have additional questions, please put them in the chat. I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to ask Janae to keep an eye on me because I am not the greatest timekeeper, but I will do my best to wrap things up in terms of our questions at 4, and then make sure that we get at least to some of the questions that might appear in the chat. So your indulgence in us not going back and forth to the chat, because I have a feeling in that case we'd never get on to some other questions. So we'll try and be respectful of our time constraints and get to everybody's interest area. So I'm going to start out with a question for both Ben and then for Katie. So we'll have Ben go first and then Katie. Ben is someone who has a lot of history in advocacy, and Katie is one of the newer members of our profession. And the question is, how did each of you become interested in advocacy? Ben.
Yeah, this is funny that Katie and I are answering this question together, because they're I imagine two very different paths to advocacy. So like I said, I've been in practice for probably almost 18 years now, you know, and for the bulk of that, I was what I would self-refer to as a credit card member, someone that kind of put down my credit card every year, paid my dues, and for a lot of that, I thought that, you know, that I was doing my part, and that was enough. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that, I don't think. But, you know, coming from when I moved out here from a different state where kind of the Practice Act was more, I don't want to say liberal, but you were able to kind of practice more close to the top of your license. And I moved out here right at the end of the spinal manipulation issue, you know, and then we had a couple different another couple issues. It was the beginning of the prior authorization. And then I was involved in a large national clinical trial regarding dry needling over for a couple different cases. And once the Attorney General opinion came out and I was forced by our lawyers to shut that trial down, I had really basically kind of had enough. And I had to kind of have a self-reflection moment where I decided, was I okay with just paying my dues every year, or do I need to take responsibility for some of the things that I felt were issues with our advocacy efforts, or what we were doing as a profession, or the relationship with our legislators. I don't know how court decisions were made. I could either start asking and get involved personally, or I was, at that point, I felt I was part of the problem. I felt like, an opportunity to reach out to a couple different people on the board. I got involved with a lot of the dry needling efforts, writing a lot of the Sunrise Review information, the technical aspects of it. And I kind of just got into it from there. And I found out that I did have an affinity for it. Reading different things and the chess game that is the legislative process. I had an affinity for it, and I wouldn't have ever known that if I hadn't taken that first step. And, for me, it was vastly different from Katie's story. I'm sure she'll tell you. It was something where I was in practice for 10 years at that point. Didn't really know that I had that kind of affinity, but I would just encourage all of you at some point to take that step if you feel that, it's important to you and if you want to be part of the solution. So, that's kind of how I got involved in it. And, I kind of trial by fire. I've learned a lot. I've, learned how to play lawyer on TV, all that type of stuff. But we have awesome resources, and a lot of people kind of took me under the wing, and I learned a lot of different things, and and I found that I had the ability to contribute in a way that I found meaningful to myself and hopefully to the profession as well. So that's how I got involved with it. I'll turn it over to Katie. Yeah.
Yes, Katie, thank you. Thanks, Ben.
Well, thanks, Ben. And thank you to the ESSEG for this opportunity to be here today. It certainly is a special event. My journey is different. Mine started kind of where you guys are at right now. My first kind of experience into advocacy was actually at a national advocacy dinner in North Carolina while I was a student. I was a first year. I had no idea what I was doing, right? And I think you don't know what you don't know until you're there. And at that event, I had the opportunity to hear from people who were involved and what sort of things we were discussing. And similar to what Ben was talking about, the spinal manipulation task force, I didn't even know that you couldn't practice that way in North Carolina. And so for me, why was I learning a skill that I couldn't use? And so that's where it at first really hit with me. I'm like, we learn these skills and we have this practice, we go to school, we pay all this money. And if that's what our patient needs, we should be able to practice that way. And so I kind of got hooked from there, and just sought out opportunities. I said yes to things I felt like I had no business being a part of. And I think that's how it starts. It's where you don't feel that you have something to offer. It's the just a student mentality. And that is what I wanted to kind of fight. And I still try to do that because we're not just students, right? And so from that point, I said yes to going to our state legislative day in North Carolina and Raleigh. And I found that we actually do have a lot to offer. Those legislators and their assistants, they don't know what physical therapy is for the most part. And you have an opportunity to educate them on what you do and why caps to student loan limits are important, because you're the ones that are going to school and you're the ones that know how that affects you. So from that moment, I was like, well, let's say yes to something else. Let's go do something else. And luckily I had good mentors within my program who kind of took me under their wing. And when I wanted to do something, they allowed me to be there in that space. So then I went to Federal Advocacy Forum in Washington, D.C., another place where it was overwhelming, but I was just there to learn. And I found in that space, there was students, there was clinicians, and that was a little bit of a bigger scheme and it was intimidating, but those steps that you take outside of your comfort zone are where you realize that, you know, you have a voice. And what Meryl was talking about with your membership, it's so much more than, you know, some of the tangible things that you get. It's the opportunities that are provided to you to make a bigger impact in your profession and what gives you passion and purpose outside of the 9 to 5. Because as a new grad, I can tell you that 9 to 5 is a lot different than going to school. And you just have to find something outside of your work hours that give you meaning and help bring you back to like why you're doing what you're doing every day. And so for me, it's just been like saying yes to things that I didn't feel like I had a value to contribute to. But once you're there, it's so different and it's really special. And so I just encourage you guys to just say yes, just show up and see what happens, because you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, that's a great story. I just want to echo, like I've always kind of thought of it as, and Katie really alluded to, but I look at like APTA and our association, the work that they do gets us a seat at the table for decision makers, but it's really your stories that move the needle or get things done, man. Like, don't ever be afraid to tell your story or to put it out there, because, you know, everybody in the association, Melissa, we do a ton of hard work to get a seat at the table, but gosh, the stories that you all can tell and that you experience and that your patients experience are what truly kind of move the needle in terms of legislation and advocacy. So
Thanks, Ben, and thank you, Katie. There was another question similar to that, but Katie, I think that you covered the several concrete suggestions and your mantra of just say yes. Say yes, and in fact, don't even wait to be asked. Okay, sometimes those of us who have some, you know, experience or roles on boards forget to ask. So don't wait for an invitation. We want you with us. We absolutely want you with us. And if you step up and say, here's my interest, is there some place for me? I guarantee you that we will say yes, and we will find that place for you. Absolutely. This next question is for Amanda. Amanda, would you talk about physical therapist assistant representation within the House of Delegates and the PTA caucus, and some of the current issues that PTAs are facing?
I would love to. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having this dinner. And I'm honored to be here to kind of talk about the physical therapist assistant profession and the representation. If you hear my dog in the background, I apologize. He might be getting hungry, who knows? So physical therapist assistants, currently each state has a physical therapist assistant caucus representative. There's also some states that have an alternate. So with that being said, this caucus, we elect 5 delegates and 1 alternate delegate. One of those 5 delegates is our chief delegate. We also have 3 members of the nominating committee. So the 5 delegates that we elect, they get a chance at the House of Delegates to comment on motions. We get to collaborate for motions or amendments. We do not get a chance to vote. So currently Washington, Texas, Oregon, and the PTA caucus are working together in this bylaws year to work on getting PTAs a vote. So there's 2 different ways that we're going to do that. One is we're trying to get 2 PTA delegates a vote for our caucus. This will kind of echo the sections vote that got passed last year. And then another one is to allow the sections, chapters, to allow PTAs to run as delegates. So this isn't a mandate. This is just giving those states an option to allow PTAs to run. There's a plethora of reasons why physical therapist assistants, we're 10% of the association. There has been a long history of the PTAs. Last year was our 50th anniversary. Unfortunately, in 98, the House changed the vote. So PTAs had the right to vote, and it was taken away. There was a significant drop in membership for PTAs, and it's been a work to try to get it back up because they don't see the APTA working for them in their perspective, which is not the case. I want to say APTA and APTA Washington are advocating very hard for PTs, our patients, our practice. It's one of those where we just got TRICARE passed so that we can finally see them after years of not being able to see them. Obviously, the Medicare cut is going to be hard in general for all of us that are going into the workforce, especially for PTAs next year with that 15% cut. So it's one of those things where we need to continue to advocate for these. I get the opportunity, which took me a while to be at this level, to be a PTA caucus rep alternate and to sit on the APTA Washington Board of Directors. This was only a recent thing, the past 4 years, and I've been practicing for almost 17. I was one where, as a student, I went to the Legislative Impact Day, and I thought that was my role. And I did really well, and I loved it. I loved to meet people, talk to my legislators. I felt like I was making a difference. But you get to do so much more. And then I started to expand into different roles. So obviously a lot of us sitting here are on boards and committees, but there's so many smaller places to start. So keep that in mind, and please feel free to ask us questions.
Thanks, Amanda. That was a great summary of a big chunk, and I appreciate that. Thanks so very much. Our next question is for Rob. Hi, Rob. The APTA Washington DEI committee was just created a year ago now. We created this committee at our June board meeting just a year ago. What are the recommendations and the experiences that you've had so far in the promotion of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the PT profession, whether that might be in the academic realm that you'd like to discuss or in clinical settings? Kind of a broad question, so it gives you a little bit of opportunity to share the experiences so far with us.
Well, thanks for the question, Meryl. It's a great question, and I just wanted to take a second to thank Janae for organizing this. It's really fun to participate in. I wasn't quite sure if you were going to organize like Uber Eats for everybody since this was a dinner. So I didn't eat, so I'm hungry now. But in any case, again, thanks for the question. I think so far as my recommendations, the short and sweet answer is for you guys to get involved and participate at any level, big or small. It takes a village, as they would say. I would readily admit, and I appreciate Ben saying this in his comments earlier about being a credit card member for a long time, and I think in the beginning of my career, I've been practicing for over 22 years, I think. You kind of stop counting after a while, but like a lot of PTs in my generation, chasing a lot of letters at the end of your name that don't fit on your business card anymore. But now having done this for quite some time, I can appreciate our role in mentoring and helping your generation, and so to be able to be involved in things like this is truly an honor. In terms of my experiences, coming from the New York City area, I was already working in a pretty culturally diverse environment. So to be completely honest, I think a lot of these things didn't necessarily occur to me then, because we weren't experiencing the same issues that we are now, or at least they weren't at the same forefront. That proved to be a bit different when I moved to Seattle. So I moved to Seattle in 2010, And at that time, that's when I was working for a Swedish hospital. And my supervisor at the time asked if I wanted to be a part of at the time it was PTWA, the Cultural Competency Task Force. And I think some people probably on this call were around then. So I was the chair of the task force then. And, being the only minority in my department, and just wanting to take advantage of any opportunity afforded to me, I took it on. And I tell you, it totally bombed. I think it lasted probably less than a year. We met a handful of times. I think this was for a few reasons. There weren't too many people involved, and we didn't have the internet back then. Just kidding, actually. We did have the internet, but we didn't have the type of social media and connectivity that we have today. I mean, this is, living proof of that. We didn't have Zoom, we didn't have GChat, we didn't have FaceTime. I only and I think Jackie Barry is on this call, but and Kenny, we sit on the committee together. I was only introduced to Slack like a couple of months ago, and my head was spinning at first, but we didn't have those type of things. So I think the task force kind of sputtered out because it was just really hard for people to connect. Fast forward to 2020, 2021, it's the perfect combination of just hitting, this cultural tipping point, as I kind of like to think of it, and now we're more empowered to share our voices and connect. Again, this is just a perfect example of that. And social media has made it such that these type of topics and conversations can't be avoided. You could try to avoid them, but they're out there. So with all the momentum and all the things that happened last year, I was really moved to participate in our DEI committee. We have a great chair, Rachel Heron. I don't know if she's with us today, but she organizes, leads us. We just had a meeting just a couple of days ago. Jackie provides some, really great mentorship to us, to myself in particular. We have a really great group of regular participants, and we have really engaging discussions every month. And then we share messages over Slack. I mean, like that's kind of, again, a new thing for me, but it's just really great to be able to continue to connect even around the clock, even when people, aren't on the Zoom. Moving forward in terms of how to promote DEI in our profession, this is actually a question that our committee is tackling right now. One of the first things that we did was to conduct a survey. I think we had about 100 respondents basically asking what DEI meant to people. And we wanted to understand what everybody's standing definition was and what DEI meant to them. And we got some really interesting responses. By and large, they were what you would have expected, but there were a handful of responses that caught us by surprise, and this is a big challenge. I think that, and perhaps in a breakout session, some of the other committee members might be able to kind of share their feelings on it or impressions of it. But again, we got some responses that I certainly didn't expect, and it was good though, because it helped us put a pause on things and help to discuss and chat and give us different perspectives on kind of how to move forward. I think that was kind of a long-winded answer to the question. So, again, kind of circling back, I think it's really just getting involved and being a part of things like this.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that. And yes, the DEI committee certainly did have some answers that were, or responses that were not necessarily anticipated. And I think that just brought even to the forefront the need for this working group and our need for guidance and discussion and open dialogue with regard to responding to and having tools to respond to challenges as they might come up in the academic environment and in the workplace. for sure. Melissa, hi, Melissa. You just finished up with our legislative session, and now instead of going to Disneyland, you're going to let us know a little bit about, give us an update on the very interesting virtual legislative session and some of the outcomes of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Meryl, and thanks also to Janae for putting this together. Yeah, to say that this was a unique legislative session is a complete understatement. We were all virtual. You know, I've been doing this for 24 years now, and this was just unprecedented as far as how the legislature conducted its business. I mean, you all know this. You know, the public was not able to be on the Capitol campus. They had a handful of legislators in person to conduct business, but for the most part, legislators were at home Zooming in. The floor, if you will, the floor sessions were all via Zoom. Committee hearings were via Zoom. And because of the virtual nature, the legislature, the Democrats in the House and Senate, who have the majority, set some parameters before the legislature started. And I think looking back, I think that was a really smart thing to do, even though for one of our issues, we didn't get to have our one of our issues introduced, but they really recognized you know, the limitations of the session and really wanted to do good work. And so there were 4 issue areas that back in November, I think it was, the legislature came out and said, okay, we're going to focus our activities on 4 issues. And of course, number 1 was COVID. You know, any bills dealing with COVID relief, how to address COVID across a broad spectrum. So from healthcare to, you know, unemployment insurance and workers' compensation, all of those issues that deal with COVID. The second issue was economic recovery, because, you know, a year ago, our state was not in a good financial position. And a year later, it's a completely different story. And so all of the economic recovery efforts, along with the federal dollars that have been coming in, second issue area of focus. Racial equity, that theme crossed almost all committee issues. Healthcare, obviously, but you know, police accountability, it was everywhere. And legislators were rightly focused on that issue. And then climate change was the 4th area. And so going into the legislative session, we unfortunately got some kind of bad news right away. You know, one of our top issues is dry needling and getting that into the scope of practice for physical therapists. And in conversations with our House prime sponsor, Representative Nicole Macri, I think when we were talking to her in November, right after the legislature kind of announced their 4 topic areas, you know, she told us that unfortunately, you know, our dry needling issue was not going to make the cut. And the legislature was not really interested in doing any scope of practice, anything highly controversial. They did not do companion bills either, for the most part. So typically we have a bill in both chambers, the House and Senate. They were advising just, you know, pick one, because again, they were trying to just deal with a smaller number of bills. And so that was really difficult, because this was, you know, this is a long session. This is a session where you would tackle a controversial issue like dry needling. But, you know, we were, you know, kind of faced with that reality. And so we chose to respect that and to focus on other issues, not just related to physical therapy, but broader healthcare issues. And it turns out that there was plenty of work and plenty of advocacy that we could do to help our profession and help our patients. So I'll just highlight a couple of those bills that we worked on and supported throughout the process. And the first 2 really fit into that COVID related bucket, if you will. The House Bill 1196, this is the bill dealing with audio only telehealth and allowing reimbursement parity for the delivery of healthcare through audio only. When we were visiting with legislators last summer and fall, and this was the good part about being virtual. Merrill, who's in Spokane, Ben, who is in Snohomish County, I'm in Olympia. We were able to Zoom with so many legislators, and I could have my president and my legislative chair, and then other PTs as needed, Zoom into with these legislator meetings. And so that was really a great thing. So when we were talking about access to care with lawmakers during COVID, when healthcare was completely shut down and you were having to close your doors, obviously telehealth became the only way to deliver care. And many of our rural legislators said that their constituents were telling them they don't have sufficient broadband. Like telephone, the old-fashioned telephone was the way many people were getting their care, both in the physical health side and in behavioral health. And so this legislation allowed for reimbursement parity, so that if you are delivering care through just the telephone, it's not just the telephone, it's the same care. You're using your same expertise, it's just the manner of delivery. So that was really helpful, I think, to those constituents of those lawmakers who really just couldn't get healthcare any other way. One of the other bills, again, that was COVID related, dealt with reimbursement for PPE. Obviously, again, COVID kicked everything into just a different realm as far as personal protection equipment and the requirements that you all have when you're delivering care to your patients. And so there was legislation that passed that allows for it's a modest reimbursement, but reimbursement for the cost of that PPE for any credentialed healthcare provider. So again, not just PT related. And there's a new CPT code that you all use, and I think Jackie's been sending out information about that. So again, another kind of small but important piece of legislation that passed for all healthcare providers. And then the third bill fits into the racial equity issue area, and that's Senate Bill 5229. And this legislation will require all credentialed healthcare providers to have at least once every 4 years some racial health equity training, so continuing education. There is quite a runway for this bill to be implemented. The Department of Health will be starting to look at this issue and to develop some model rule language for the boards and commissions at the Department of Health to look at as far as what is appropriate for health providers. I know the sponsor of the legislation, Senator Emily Randall, her aim is this isn't for her a check the box. She wants this to be a relevant continuing education opportunity for professions. And so she really wants the professions to get involved and to be a part of that conversation about what is appropriate. And so we, APTA Washington and PTs in our state will have an opportunity to engage with the Physical Therapy Board at the Department of Health when they begin their work looking at what they think is appropriate for physical therapists and physical therapist assistants as far as this health equity training. So that bill has passed and was signed into law as well. And then the last one I'll talk about is kind of a fun one. And it was our House Resolution 4629, celebrating 100 years of the physical therapy profession. Again, Representative Nicole Macri held the baton for us on this one, and we had many other co-sponsors for this House resolution. It's a fun thing. Again, unfortunately, because of the virtual nature of session, we didn't get to have anybody in the gallery when the legislature was talking about this. It kind of it slipped by. They didn't discuss it on any floor session at all. But we do have the official resolution to post and to feel good that the legislature did honor the physical therapy profession in its 100-year anniversary.
Thanks, Melissa. I appreciate that. It was a great summary, and it leads us into the next topic, the next question. Ben, would you share with us what you think the major focus areas coming up for the next year or two of the legislative sessions might be?
So fingers
Oh,
crossed.
I'm sorry, I've shared the wealth. I'm giving that piece to Ben.
Oh, sorry.
Melissa, go ahead. No, I mean, Melissa and I, we've been working on this. The main issue that we're looking forward after kind of battling in the insurers for the last several sessions and getting prior authorization and registration with the OIC passed, the reimbursement for PPE, all that type of stuff. We're kind of moving our focus back to some scope of practice issue that we have kind of had, for various reasons, had to put a table over the last couple sessions. So for the primary one that we will be pushing for is bringing dry needling back into the PT scope of practice in Washington. You know, as a historical perspective, that was kind of removed from our ability to practice in Washington with an OIG opinion. We went through a sunrise review. They provided some recommendations. They felt that, you know, with the right training and clinical review, that they could be within the scope of physical therapy practice. So we took their recommendations, you know, around clinical supervision, additional training hours. We've worked with Washington East Asian Medical Association over the last couple sessions, trying to come to some sort of agreement, or at least a tacit ceasefire. We're not there yet, but we have made some ground there. We've been able to clarify language between professions. We've been able to you know, come up with the areas that the training needs to be. We haven't been able to agree on hours, but you know, but through all those kind of stakeholder discussions, we put together a legislative bill that we feel that you know, has a strong chance of getting through in the next session or two. It's a dry needling bill with increased training hours, probably more than is necessary when I'm speaking to colleagues. But, you know, this is one of those situations where, you know, it's the political landscape of the state. You know, what we think is excessive is just, it's not going to, you know, what's reasonable, it just isn't going to fly. So we had to do some work on figuring out how to, you know, increase the training hours without being a huge burden kind of on our membership. You know, so we came up with a bill. It's a combination of kind of didactic hours that you could have gotten anywhere, plus approximately about 75 hours of direct needling time. The other really big component that we needed to try to include in that legislation was a clinical supervision or a clinical review, you know, component of that. And again, we were very hesitant to, again, as Robin knows, she can attest to that we sometimes we got to do things that we don't want to do based on the political landscape. So we try not to go down the spinal manipulation road on that with all those areas. So what we had the opportunity, because in that sunrise review, they did indicate that we should follow the United States military model. And in that language is what they call an out of area clinical review. So basically, the clinician practices dry needling, gets the cases, and then they send those cases to someone that, you know, is qualified to review that. So hopefully that we'll be able to practice. We'll be able to gather those hours or those clinical cases. They'll be reviewed, and then that'll be an endorsement. You know, that'll be approved by the Department of Health as an endorsement, much like spinal manipulation issue. So this is, again, will be a heavy lift. As Melissa said earlier, legislators don't like scope of practice things to begin with, and they definitely don't like them when they're controversial. So I think we've done a lot of groundwork. We've done a lot of work on at least being able to demonstrate that we have met with WIAMA, and we've worked hard, and we've taken some of their suggestions in our language. We've done a lot of groundwork. What we're really going to need to do is really be noisy in the coming session. Like, in the last times we tried to do this, we were very quiet. We got killed on the phones by Washington East Asian Medical Association. And, and I understand, like a lot of people, not everybody is going to want to incorporate dry needling, but I think I would encourage you all, or it's not even appropriate for some of our practice groups, but I would encourage you all to think about what's really going on here, right? We need to be able to make sure that we can practice at the top of our license, whatever that is. And by kind of working to expand our scope of practice, that counteracts the contraction of that. So if we kind of push our borders further and further into the future and further into different areas, that allows us to have some breathing room. And I think that that's the important part. Even if this isn't an issue that's necessarily passionate to you, it is the principle, the expansion of scope of practice and maintaining our scope of practice is an issue that will affect everybody at some point. So I would say this is one of those situations where, even this is never going to cross your radar. This is something that we have to be noisy about and really push these things through in state. Because the reality is 45 other states allow dry needling. We're one of 5. And that was really my big frustration. I was tired of playing with my hands behind my back. But this is, there are plenty of other issues that in other areas where, it will behoove me to be an advocate for those issues, even though I'm never going to probably use that technique or come across that scenario. But I think this is where these type of things in the future, especially this issue, which is controversial here, really is going to require everybody to be involved and to respond and be supportive of the bill and make some noise. And that's that's the big one we're going to push for in the next session.
Thanks, Ben. I want to acknowledge some of Robin's comments in the chat. I think it is really when an issue that involves some of us, it involves all of us, and we come to each other for support. We will be bringing forward this legislation. There will be a lot of information that will be available on the APTA website. There will be narratives. There will be information that you can use if you've never heard of intramuscular needling before, and if it's never crossed your mind to apply it in your practice, if it's completely inappropriate for your particular practice arena. That's not the issue. The issue is that you are a physical therapist or a physical therapist assistant, and we need your help and we need your advocacy. We need your advocacy and your voices as students. I think Katie brought up a tremendous talking point earlier today when she said, I've been educated and trained in all of these practice strategies, and I should be able to practice at the top of my license. And for that reason, when we call upon you on a legislative impact day or to make a phone call to your area representative in Olympia, we will have things prepared for you. You will not have to feel out in the cold with regard to discussion points. And if you're still going to be students next year, there is no population in Washington that legislators like to hear from and talk to more than students. They recognize that you are currently their constituents, you are currently their voters, and they're talking to you as future voters, and they're talking to you as future business people who will be bringing income into the state. And when I go with a group of students to visit a legislator, I'm chopped liver. I put the students front and center, and they are the ones who make the greatest impression on our legislators. So please consider this an official invitation for those of you who would like an invitation to be able to say yes to become involved in our legislative effort for intramuscular needling this coming legislative session. Yeah. Okay, Jonathan, hi. Just like we have state issues, we have national issues that APTA lobbies for very effectively in Washington, D.C. and the other Washington. And so would you share with our group what the current legislative agenda and most important issues are in front of our Washington, D.C. Legislators this year?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for inviting me, Janae. Again, thanks for organizing and everyone involved. As Meryl said, I'm kind of the new kid on the block, and so I'm just excited to be here. And I was reading the book Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. I think Stephen Covey, and that kind of summarizes how my involvement came to be. Is Ben's comment of being tired of practicing with your hands behind your back. I think, you hear these laws both at the state and the federal level where they're coming down the pipe, and then suddenly you're getting paid less, or you can't do a specific treatment or skill, and you feel very I guess disabled in terms of what you're able to do. And I realized I was being very reactive. And one of my favorite habits in that book is being proactive, which, I have 4 children and I preach that to them daily. And here I am being reactive to some of these big legislative issues that are impacting how I practice every day. And so that's kind of what helped me jump into where I am right now. And just loving the process of being involved, of hearing what's being introduced at the federal level, which I'll be quick and summarize because it's hard to keep up with all these bills that are being introduced and how they're impacting us. So I can give you some strategies too to keep up with it. But most recently, telehealth. Melissa talked about the bill that she was working with that was introduced for audio using telephone, and at the federal level, the Expanded Telehealth Access Act of 2021, HR 2168, was recently introduced and was huge because it was introduced in a response to obviously COVID. But this one is big for us because initially the telehealth providers list was waived during the public health emergency, and that allowed us, PTs and PTAs, to treat patients via telehealth. And hopefully you guys have had an opportunity to use this way to access patients, which I feel like is really the future, even as COVID is lessening and the impact hopefully is improving. I think this is still a medium that we are going to continue to use, specifically in rural populations, and it just opens up our opportunity to be effective as clinicians. And so this bill, as the public health emergency goes away, so does our ability to charge for telehealth services. And so this bill being introduced extends our service and lists us as being one of the providers that continue to use telehealth in the future. So that's a big one. We talked a little bit about Medicare cuts already for PTAs. If you guys remember back in the fall, hopefully if you're on some of these advocacy emails, going way back in 2019, Medicare proposed a 9% pay cut to PT services that was going to start January 1st, 2021. And on top of everything that was going on in the pandemic, this would just been brutal for our profession. And you talk about advocacy, it was exciting to see over 120,000 letters to Congress in 6 months and more than 30,000 comments to oppose this rule that CMS was proposing. And the cut thus was reduced to 3% in 2021, which is still a cut, not ideal, but I think powerful in representing how advocacy really was effective, and how what Meryl talked about, how our voices are heard. So continue to look for legislation on that as Medicare continues to come out with their payment and their rules, and we'll continue to advocate and and try to reduce or eliminate cuts for the future. For students, there's a workforce diversity Act, HR 3320, that was introduced just this last week in both the House and the Senate. And this is bipartisan legislation that would increase the opportunities for individuals underrepresented in the profession of PT. And so this aligns with our public policy document that we've released to Congress. And really exciting. I think it's gaining traction tremendously, and it will provide strategies, including outreach, creation, or expansion of mentorship and tutoring programs, and provide scholarships and stipends to students to help reduce or help improve representation in PT, OT, speech language therapy, and
Jonathan, you froze up for me. Has he frozen for other people? Okay. I want to be respectful of our time and also, of course, respectful of Jonathan. So perhaps he'll be able to expand on some of the other areas in the National Affairs breakout room. And I hope that he'll come back to us unfrozen in just a couple of minutes. It's time now. We have time now for questions, and so please do feel free to pop your question into the chat. I see that I have one right now, and I'll read it to you. And I'm happy to have any of the panelists who would like to respond. Just kind of unmute yourself, and I'll try to manage things. This question is from Jamie. How do you maintain momentum in your advocacy work? What areas or tasks do you think are most challenging for maintaining momentum? And that's a terrific question. And those of us who've been involved in advocacy for quite a while. So I'm open to any of our folks. Ben, if you wanted to, because as you in your role as ledge chair, you not only have to maintain the momentum, but you have to inspire all of the other legislative committee members to keep the fires burning. Perhaps you'd like to start out with that.
Yeah, I think really the biggest challenge, and I guess the biggest need is really kind of just your principles of influencing people, and it's really, and that comes down to me is making enough contacts, right? It's going to be 6 or 7 times that you've got to bring this issue up with a legislator or a key stakeholder, whether it be a government task force or the Department of Health or the OIC. And, probably the biggest challenge is making sure that you can make those contacts, right? Someone is telling that story enough times to when time for a decision comes, that they've heard about this, and this is something that's on the front of their mind, and they have the doors open, for a real discussion on policy. But it'd be easy if it was just Melissa or I going and, we'd sit down with the legislator one time and we say, here's what our policy document is, and hey, pass this for us. It really takes, that would be easy. But that's where the momentum part comes in, and that's where all the different stories come in. And it's really, we have to make those type of key contacts over and over and over. And this is stuff that happens, 3 or 4 or 5 years preceding when we actually run a bill. And it really is, in my role and what I've seen is you'd be so surprised, like where those advocacy contacts come from. Like, it really is like you talking to a patient about something that's, on your mind, and that person happens to be a big healthcare purchaser, or runs a big corporation, and they talk to somebody, and then they talk to them, and that's something that, or just telling your story, like in Deer Park. That's how the whole prior authorization came out. It was one clinic telling a story about prior authorization to a legislative assistant, and the legislative assistant told the story to the senator, and and it was on like Donkey Kong. And then we were able to pass, nation first legislation around prior authorization. So it really is that type of stuff. Is don't be afraid to tell that story. Like, you'd be surprised how far that goes. And I think that is really the key to developing the type of momentum, in session, between sessions, to get a seat at the table where you can actually make a policy decision and a policy change. So
I think it's also important to realize that very rarely do we get something passed in one biennium. So the idea of not being disappointed because something didn't move through or something got stuck in a committee or didn't ever get out of a committee in your first go round, in your first rodeo, it is the way it is. Robin, you're on the call somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And Robin, why don't you comment for just a minute, because I don't see any other question in the chat, on how long it took us to reinstall spinal manipulation in our practice. Robin Schoenfeld was our legislative chair during many of those legislative biennia.
So with much hand holding and from Melissa Johnson, thank you very much, Melissa. And thank you, Janae, for organizing this so we can explain some of the stories in the background. I think I came in 20 years after the spinal manipulation prohibition was put in place. And so I came in the last quarter of it. And what we went through, I started working with Elaine Armentrout, and it was an issue that, had been ongoing for years. And some of these things, sometimes you have to understand, and I think to Meryl's credit and what she just said, you really have to understand what the legislative process is. And it's not just that, you have to understand what the legislative process is in your particular state. And so that will vary from state to state. I could listen to, in some of our national meetings, people from Idaho who were getting everything they wanted left and right. And we're like, yep, okay, thanks. And so, but really just trying to get to the idea of, okay, what more can we think of? What more can we present? What more, and just continuing that momentum and having the support from other people who are interested in and trying to, keep that fire going, as Ben said, with everybody. It's a difficult task, but, one year we did get a bill passed very quickly. And that was just it was a corrective PTA wording. It was some wording bill. And I'm like, but, so it was like, oh, hey, so I was fortunate enough to have some momentum, but, I knew kind of what I was taking on when I entered the battle here. And I think that's really helpful, is to just realize, some of these things are going to, when I'm coming into something that's already been ongoing for 20 years, I think I've realized, this is a difficult thing. And so I'm going to take Melissa's advice, and we are very fortunate to have Melissa Johnson, because she is very well recognized and very well respected by the legislature. So it's a slow process, and it requires some patience for some things. So putting together the best teams we can, and that's what we've done every time, and just trying to go from there.
I think, again, I'm reminded to let the students know that how much a part of our maintaining our momentum you are, because you are a new group every year. We have a turnover, certainly every 3 years, in our students, and we have new students every year. And the new students have the energy. They've never heard these arguments before. They've never visited a legislator before. And you have a group of students who goes into a legislator's office, 10, 15 students, one legislator, and they say, listen, I'm spending X number of hours learning and practicing how to use spinal manipulation appropriately, or how to apply dry needling appropriately. And I'm spending a lot of money to learn and to perfect these skills. And if you're in a school that is a state, we never say state funded anymore, but state supported program. If you're a student at UW or at Eastern or at one of the community colleges that is a part of the community college system, the legislature is spending money on your education too. And you say to them, I come out of there ready to practice, and you forbid me to practice within the structure of the education that you have paid for in part and provided me, and yet I'm going to move to Idaho, or I'm going to move to Oregon, or I'm going to move to Montana, where it's just as beautiful and it's still the Northwest, and I'm going to practice at the top of my game. And those are the messages that I think legislators hear, and those are the messages that really energize the clinicians that are there with you. I do want to be respectful of time. I'm just about 4:13 on my watch. And so I'm going to thank the panelists. Thank you, Robin, as well for contributing, and the panelists and facilitators for all of your wisdom sharing during this session. And we'll turn it over to Janae, who through some magic powers is going to put us all in breakout rooms. And I will see you again close to the end of our session today. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you all again. Thank you, panelists, Meryl and Robin, for all of your wisdom and insight. I'm going to echo the same thoughts. So now we're going to be in breakout rooms, and your breakout room may be categorized by DI, state, or advocacy, and you're going to be in different rooms for each round. So you might be with the same people, or you might not be. So I'm going to ask everybody to turn on your cameras, and hopefully we'll have some great discussions in the breakout rooms. and then we will be done for today. Oh, yeah, I have to share my screen. Okay, I think you all can see this. Right, so some resources for advocacy, if you all haven't talked about this already in your breakout rooms, is the APTA Action Center. So it's just apta.org/advocacy. You can see the current issues impacting our profession, and there you can find, like, you can send those pre-written letters to legislators and view kind of the public policy priorities. And here in the picture on the right, you can kind of see each issue, and then when you say take action, it has the pre-written letters that you can send to your local representatives. And for technology's sake, this is all transferred to the APTA Action app. You can download it on any phone service. We can, again, find your legislators, send those pre-written messages to them, and donate to the PT Political Action Committee, which is basically kind of the legislative fundraiser. So we can kind of fund those who support the APTA profession and kind of keep our advocacy efforts going. And I know I mentioned this in one of my breakout rooms, but this is the PT PAC Coffee Club. So this is exclusively for early professional physical therapists and physical therapy assistants up to 5 years after their school. And there they have mentorship opportunities, webinars on the latest issues, and CSM meetups. I believe you donate $5 a month to the PT PAC. And next, each county in the state of Washington actually has a pretty good presence. If you can see this photo here, there you can get legislative updates, free continuing ed courses, there's volunteer opportunities, and there's social events. So this would be a great way to kind of get out and meet the other physical therapists and physical therapy assistants in your area and get some great networking and advocacy efforts in. And here are the student special interest group social media links. If you want to send us an email, it's ptwasig@gmail.com, or you can send us a message on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And here's the APTA Washington social media links. You can always find events. We're always hosting events there. Okay. And that was it. Thank you, everybody, for taking your Saturday to come hang out with us. And I hope you got some good learning and discussion in. And that is it. Thank you all again. I hope you enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, Janae.
Thanks, Janae. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janae.
Everybody have a nice evening.